Hi, I'm Robert Dutt for ChannelBuzz.ca, joined today by Shawn Massey, Channel Sales Manager for Storagecraft. Shawn, thanks for taking the time.
Thank you very much.
Nice to meet you, and wanted to talk a little bit about disaster recovery. And it's we talk a lot about backup, we talk a lot about all that goes around that, but it really is sort of the disaster recovery where the value comes out, isn't it?
That's absolutely correct. And when we look at disaster recovery, often I think that people underestimate on whether disasters can happen to them. Now, certainly, when we think about the catastrophic disaster, that only happens really 2 to 3% of the time. That's the tornado, the flood, the fire, the tsunami, whatever it is. That happens so few, but you need to be able to protect yourself from that. The most common disaster is really hardware failure, user error, Windows patches, those type of things that can take your systems down.
When you're working with VARs and MSPs, what do you see as their challenges in positioning and really communicating the idea of disaster recovery to their customers?
Well, that's an excellent question. The challenge really is communicating and getting by the block that people have because they don't think it's going to happen to them. So, for instance, you look at I often talk about when I do presentations. I ask people, raise your hand if you've ever had the dream where you're falling, and usually, a good amount of people raise their hand, and then I ask them to keep their hands up for the folks that have seen themselves go splat, and no one does, right? And the reason is I think there's really an innate human type of quality that keeps us from engaging really disastrous things,
Right.
So we buffer ourselves. So what happens, like in the dream analogy, is that you end up either waking up, you end up maybe going into a different dream, or you do something, maybe you start flying or something like that. But when we talk about disasters recovery and we're trying to engage our customers, it's a hard thing because they're actually kind of buffering themselves. They don't think it's going to happen to them. And that's the challenge for our solution providers is to try to adequately get that engagement so that they know what the risk is, and then they can help do the things that they need to do in order to help mitigate those risks.
What are some of the things that work to get past that sense of insulation that businesses tend to have around that?
Well, I think the biggest thing is really trying to engage into specifics. So if you're talking to a business owner, of really saying, all right, how really you don't have email now. How dependent are you on your email?
Yeah.
And then when they realize that, because what will happen is that if you just take everything at face value and you don't really challenge the end user business to engage disaster that it could happen, then when it does happen, they might say, oh, we can be down for a week, right? And that's a very typical. People off the top of their head, I can be down for a week. But then when their email server goes down, then they're on the phone to the solution provider saying, when is this going to be back up? I need my email. I've got things that are going on. I need to get into there. So that's really the key, is to be able to find out the pressure points of what the most critical applications are, and then talk and really try to engage them on you don't have that system anymore. How are you going to run your business? And then that hopefully will be able to jog them to a point where, oh yeah, you know what, we need to account for this. We need to strategize in order to help mitigate those type of situations when they occur.
All right. Ironically enough, or perhaps not ironically, but you have your own experience in a prior life. You were telling me before. When you were on the solution provider side and you got to see a little bit of the importance of disaster recovery, do you care to share a bit of that story?
Sure. I used to work for a solution provider, a fairly large solution provider, and I was a senior engineer for them. And we had a hosting center. We hosted websites, email, and did a little co-location. I designed an application hosting model. We'd call that cloud today, but at the time it was ASP. And all the good old days. Then at some point I was made the director of hosted and managed solutions. We had about 60-some servers in our data center at the time, and on March 19th of 2008, our data center burnt down. At the time, we were backing up to tape, and it took us 8 days to recover. The easiest thing, believe it or not, was to get all the equipment. We had, within 24 hours, we had all the hardware and everything that's in, but we had a number of different problems that we ran into in that disaster recovery. Mm-hmm. My 2 largest failures as an IT professional, my failure number 1 was I never thought it could happen to me. We were an IT company, we should have known, right? Mm-hmm. But I never thought, we had a disaster plan. I had offsite tapes, we were doing some things right, obviously, but the thing that I never wrapped my brain around that, yes, this can happen, and this can happen to anyone. And the failure number 2 is I never tested the catastrophic restore. We tested the tapes every week. We did a file restore, a folder restore, some type of database or some type of exchange piece, but I never said, all right, here are our tapes, we have nothing else, let's see what we can do that. And had we done that, because all disaster plans have to include testing as part of the disaster plan. Had we done that, then we would have encountered some of the issues that we encountered during our recovery, and then we could have strategized in order to get around that. But it was really, really quite the experience. And
something you probably don't hope others go through, but something that probably has some value going through.
It
right?
does.
In hindsight,
And it makes I'm very passionate about about disaster recovery and business continuity, very much so, and because of that. So, but it was quite the experience. And what happens is that I will never ever think that couldn't happen to me again. In fact, the company I used to work for, they have the same chance of a disaster today as they did the day before the fire, right? Because it's not about chances. It's about what's likely, what's more likely, what's less likely. And while a fire is less likely, it can still happen. And chances are, for some actuary that's sitting at an insurance company that's trying to figure out, what to charge premiums for. But what we need to do as businesses and as consultants and as solution providers is be able to help folks engage and really identify what the risks are, and then be able to navigate and set up a plan or a system that will be able to deal with no matter what comes your way.
So planning for that recovery for your customers, obviously key. Presumably, you would like the VARs and MSPs to do so using Storagecraft technology. Can you help me? What's the case for Storagecraft, both for VARs and MSPs and for their customers on the disaster recovery front?
Yeah. Storagecraft's really suite of products, and we call it our recoverability solution. It's from backing up. It always starts with a really good, solid backup, being able to manage it, to have some type of offsite strategy like replicating, and then also test. And when you put those 4 pieces together, that becomes your recoverability solution, right? So with Storagecraft, what we've tried to do, we're not a backup company. We are a recovery company. And the distinction is that there's a lot of backup companies out there. Sure. There's a ton, but their focus is on just backing up. So that you can check the box that says, do you have a backup? Yep, you have a backup. But there's no thought on whether you can recover or not. Now a lot of them, yes, you can recover files and folders, but if you're not in your testing, if you're not restoring the entire systems, then your backup plan is really kind of flawed, because it's all about being able to resurrect these type of systems. So what Storagecraft, what our value proposition is not only just to take a really good backup, but to be able to resurrect these systems when you need them most, when they're down. And it doesn't matter whether it's on the same hardware or the same virtual machine. It can be something completely different, because it gives you the most flexibility in that type of situation.
Great. Thank you so much for your time. Appreciate the time of the chat.